down, we've got to start again, or else we'll be too late. We won't get any of the fun stuff that we've got later packed in. How can people hear me if I speak like this? No, really not. I thought I had a loud voice. I was proud of my loud voice. No, just too loud, those fridges. Great. So it's only Joe now who's sitting down. Just saying. Great. Well, thanks for coming, everyone. We're at the end of our third day of these talks. They've been great. They've been really amazing. I love just the whole mix of having lots of different stuff going on and having lots of different people here. So the last talk of the day before our discussions is going to be me, and I'm going to be talking about emergency red flag signs in perinatal mental health. Just to briefly say something about me, so my name is Laurie Windsor, I'm a psychiatry consultant. I've recently started something called a perinatal bursary. This means that I've got some money from NHS England and the Royal College so I can train and learn more about perinatal mental health for a year, and I'm developing local services back in Devon as well. So, we've got about 35 minutes for this talk. My aim is to talk for about 20 minutes and then give us a chance to have a discussion and ask any questions at the end of it. So first I'm going to think about setting the scene. So why are red flag signs important in mental health? Now part of that is trying to understand what is different about perinatal mental health compared to other parts of mental health and how that impacts on how people might present, on the risks that are associated with that, and also how we might act differently with those risks. So to start off with, I know we're doing lots of interactive stuff, but we're just going to do one more small bit of interactive stuff. What I really want you guys to do is think about, and ideally write down, what you think the red flag signs for perinatal mental health should be. So these are the things that if you saw in a man or a woman, a mum or a dad, you would think, right, I need to act now and get advice. This might need senior psychiatric review and advice on. So what are the things that if you saw in someone you think, I want to act now and get advice? If people could, we'll give you 30 seconds or maybe a minute, just have a quick think and write them down. And what we're going to do is at the end of the session, we're going to look back at those and think about how they either are similar or completely different to the ones that are suggested by the various kind of national bodies. This too much. See, the more I do this, I'm beginning to wonder whether I should give people more time for this. Yeah. I think we'll move on now anyway, but it's good to quickly have a think, and you can keep on writing stuff for the next sort of little bit if you want. So, I mentioned that I was going to set the scene. I was going to say, why is it important? Well, partly it's important because perinatal mental health is important. It's common. We know that 1 in 5 women will have a mental health difficulties or one mental health disorder in the perinatal period. So that's when the mum is pregnant and then the year following that. We've heard today how that can have a devastating, profound impact on the mums or fathers, on the babies, on their interactions and the wider family. We also heard how that can have an impact on the child's long-standing emotional, cognitive and social development. On top of this, it's incredibly expensive. So the costs to society are really big. If we look at what's called the maternal birth cohort, so the amount of babies that are born in 1 year, the cost of perinatal mental health to society is £8.1 billion. So that's over £10,000 per birth. So for all these reasons, that NHS England has come up with a plan of putting money into services so by 2020 to 21, 30,000 more women will access perinatal mental health specialist services. It's often talked about the difference between physical and mental health, and many people argue that they're not treated equally, they're not given parity of esteem. So examples of this might include things like how many people receive treatment. So we know that 75% of people with cardiovascular disease receive treatment. If you've got diabetes or hypertension, that goes up to over 90%. 25% of people with anxiety or depression receive treatment. And so when we talk about treatment, we're not just talking about medication, we think about therapy and other support. And so this is down to difficulties in picking up and people being aware of and knowing that they've got anxiety and depression and then gaining services when they do. Picking up perinatal mental health is really important because suicide is due to become the leading independent cause of maternal deaths. So the numbers are relatively low. We're talking about 2 to 3 per 100,000. That's still one in 7 maternal deaths. But I think what is equally important is that they're not going down. That if we look at recent years, some physical health things have been identified, such as thromboembolism, so clots in the leg that can go up to the lungs. Money's been put in. These have gone down significantly as causes of maternal death. Suicide is not going down. We also know that the majority of suicides occur in the low-risk groups. So that means we don't need to just pick out who people who are really high risk. We need to identify everyone with a perinatal mental health problem. Which brings me on to identification. So we need to identify everyone, and do we? Well, no, we don't. Around half of mothers with anxiety and depression are identified, and even less receive treatment. So it makes this the largest barrier to that group of people receiving support for their mental health difficulties. There was what I think is a really good report was published, which looked at primary care and perinatal mental health, called Falling Through the Gap. And what they did is they surveyed loads of GPs, they surveyed loads of women with common mental health disorders, and looked at their interactions and thought about how can we improve this, how can we improve identification. So they decided that it was improving awareness, improving training, perhaps equally or most importantly, ensuring that equal attention is paid between physical and well-being, so physical health and well-being in all those primary healthcare appointments. Oh, I don't know what that noise is. I'll just carry on. Anyway, so I don't think I need to tell anyone here today that having a baby is a huge life event for any mum or father. We often talk about how important it is for people to know how amazing it is, how brilliant it is, how it's going to be a roller coaster. I think sometimes we don't always talk about how there can be other emotions, other extreme emotions like fear and other things. So rather than just telling you you can feel fear, I think it's much better that we show you performances like today and show you other things like books and literature. Now, this one is by Hanya Yanakara and it's from a book, A Little Life. I think it's described really well how much people can feel fear and how intense that is. So I'll just leave a minute to allow us to kind of read that. There are many reasons why people won't speak with us, why people aren't honest with us. This is one of the many reasons. So there's great mistrust of mental health services out there. There's concerns that medication or therapy or other interventions aren't helpful or might even be harmful. And on top of that, many people worry if they really tell us what's going on in their heads, if they're really honest with us, if they're really honest with the professionals who are out there saying we're trying to help you, we're trying to support you, then children's services will get involved, social services will get involved, their children will be taken away. These are all things that are going on all the time in people we work with. I mentioned that I thought that perinatal mental health was different. Well, I think it is. I think it is in many ways. And actually, I think that's really important because I think it means the traditional methods by which we try and assess and manage risk can be flawed. So the methods we use in the rest of mental health why not apply in the same way in perinatal mental health? And there's a number of reasons. So one is perinatal mental health is much more likely to fluctuate than mental health disorders at other points of their life, and this can often lead to risks being downplayed or underestimated if you're seeing someone at a point where they're not at their most distressed. There are also a number of things going on in perinatal mental health. We have to think about the mother or the father, the baby, the interaction between them and the wider family. Another crucial difference in perinatal mental health is that secondary mental health services will often really want to see people who are currently well, people who aren't distressed. So the mum who's got a previous diagnosis or current diagnosis of bipolar disorder or schizoaffective disorder or schizophrenia and is pregnant, or has past history of involvement with services or is on particular medication for their mental health, all may need to be seen by secondary mental health services. So that brings us back to this idea here that says who's the sickest. It's not always the most clear. Of often what we're looking for generally we're taught in kind of physical and mental health is looking for the most distressed people, the most risky, the most unwell. But actually that's not always going to be the most risky person in perinatal mental health. This often leads to a statement that I've heard from a few perinatal psychiatrists that the really well supported lady who isn't distressed, who's middle class and comes in to see you today and is pregnant and has got a diagnosis of bipolar disorder will be the most risky person you see that day. And that's different in my head. It's different from what I'm used to working in general adult psychiatry, which I only kind of left 3 months ago. We know that one of the biggest indicators for poor outcome is lower socioeconomic status. But we also know that suicide seems to be unrelated to socioeconomic status. So that leaves us with a lot of different things to think about. There are lots of different figures out there in terms of relapse rates for different mental disorders in the perinatal period. I think what's really important is we recognise that we've got to think about the person in front of us. And one of the biggest indicators for future chances of relapse is past history. So we've got to be really curious about the person in front of us, what their past history of mental health difficulties are, what their past relapse risks are, and things like what their current support and what's been happening. I think we can all do that. But if we think about bipolar disorder, we know that a lady with a diagnosis of bipolar disorder has a greater than 1 in 5 risk of developing postpartum psychosis, and at almost 1 in 2 risk of developing a severe postpartum depression. If someone has had a previous diagnosis of postnatal psychosis and becomes pregnant again and goes into the postpartum period again, their risks of developing psychosis again are around 50%. If there's a family history of postpartum psychosis, then all of these figures and relapse risk indicators could go up further. So now we got onto the red flag signs. I was going to get onto it eventually, promise. The red flag signs were created by the confidential inquiry into maternal deaths. This is also known as something called Embrace. This looks at maternal morbidity and mortality around UK and Ireland. And what they did is they looked at all of the different cases and they came up with a number of signs that they say, if these are seen, then you need to get senior psychiatric assessment urgently and you need to act now to get further advice. So these include recent significant change in mental state or emergence of new symptoms, new thoughts or acts of violent self-harm, new and persistent expressions of incompetency as a mother or estrangement from the infant. So we might have discussions later on about how to interpret these and what this means in practice for different people. But my view is that they're really useful things for us all to be aware of. If you see these things and you're thinking, I definitely see these signs in, that's a really good reason for you to act now and seek further advice. If you're not sure, I also think that's a really good reason for you to act now and seek further advice. So good things to be aware of. They also came up with a number of signs which they said if you see these in someone, then we should be considering admission to a mother and baby unit. Just in case people don't know, a mother and baby unit is a mental health or psychiatric unit where a mum can go with their baby, as opposed to the normal adult units where you wouldn't be going with your baby. So the sort of things that we should be looking out for to consider admission is a rapidly changing mental state, particularly of a violent nature, pervasive guilt or hopelessness, significant estrangement from the infant, new or persistent beliefs of inadequacy as a mother, and finally, evidence of psychosis. I mentioned previously further the Falling Through the Gaps report, which I think is really good. So they surveyed a large amount of women and GPs, looked at all their interactions, spent a long time looking at all of that data, and they came up with a number of different ideas of how we could improve things. One of the main things they came up with is another red flag. So they came up with this idea that voluntary disclosure of distress is a red flag. So if a mother, and I would add or father, comes in and discloses distress, that requires urgent, compassionate and thorough investigation by their GP. The Royal College of GPs went on further to actually say that if a mother comes in and tells you that they have a perinatal mental health disorder or problem, then they almost certainly have. This should not be normalised or dismissed. So they talk about this in light of GPs, but actually I think this affects us all. This works for us all. All of us can take heed of that. Another thing that they said is that women reported they have very mixed experiences of disclosing distress, and how often they can be told that this is normal, that it's all right, everyone feels like this. And actually what they were saying, what the women who were saying, who had been through the system and had support and treatment, is actually that can make things a lot worse. That can really exacerbate things. So I think we need to be really careful. There needs to be a fine balance between reassuring people, but taking real care not to dismiss their experiences, not to dismiss what they're going through. So, I've told you about what to look out for, I've told you why it's important, but I guess what's also equally important is when you think you're worried about someone, or if you know you're worried about someone, you know who to speak to. Now, this will vary a bit depending on your area that you come from. So what I've said each session, and what I'm really hoping everyone will do, is have a real action point to themselves that tomorrow, not tomorrow, Saturday, Monday, you have to hold it in your head for that long, Monday, you'll go into work and you'll work out, who will I speak to if I'm worried about someone? How does my service work? But I'll tell you about the different options. So, some organisations and trusts have something called a single point of access. So that's someone you phone up, and there'll be different people there who will triage you on to other teams, or you can ask advice directly. Sometimes my trust, like Devon, has that operating some of the time, but not all of the time. Home treatment or crisis teams are also important. These teams can theoretically see people at least once a day, and they're there to offer support to people who are at risk or would otherwise be in hospital. Many different areas now have perinatal community mental health teams. They are really useful places to go to ask for support. If you don't have that, you could go to a community mental health team. The one thing I would say though is, if you really are worried, all of the reports that have looked at really unfortunate things that have happened when really risky things have happened or people have unfortunately taken their own life have talked about the importance of that person who is worried at the beginning being persistent and being really clear about what they're worried about. If you're worried, be persistent, be clear, and if you're not happy with one response, then you can speak to someone else. I've talked about the different options there are. There could be other people you speak to. So I haven't talked about it in detail now. I think it's just worth mentioning that it's everyone's business to think about safety. Provide your advice on that as well. So resources. Well, there are actually quite a lot of resources out there. They're increasing and improving. It's really good. So I talked about Embrace. That's the confidential inquiry. They've got I think it's about a 92-page report that I read. Don't worry, you don't have to. It's got about a 2-page summary at the beginning with lots of pictures so I could understand it, and that's a really good starting point. It's got some stuff in. And actually another more interactive thing is the RCGP toolkit. That one is really useful for lots of people who aren't GPs. You don't need to be a doctor or GP to navigate yourself around it. That's why it was set up for use by lots of different people. And I think that's the most useful thing that I've had. That's got lots of really good advice in terms of psychoeducation, so information to help people understand about their perinatal mental health problems, and then also some advice on how to ask about it and where you might go next. Great, so just to finish up, we'll just finish up with that exercise. Can people have a look again at the stuff they wrote down at the beginning of the session when we thought about what might be the things that if you saw in a person, mother or father, you would want to act now and get advice immediately, or red flag signs. I could just have a show of hands for my interest. Who wrote stuff down that was very similar, or similar in some ways to what is suggested by Embrace? So everyone puts up their hands. So quite a lot of people who put stuff down which they think is very different. Well, that's similar again to Wednesday before, which I think brings up the interesting thing about how we interpret it. But I think I come back to my idea that it's just really important just to be aware of it, that if we're aware of those, and actually we can even say those when we're referring and speaking to other people, I think that can be really useful. Okay, thank you. I think a couple of questions now. George,
you take questions.
Does anyone have any questions? So we do have. Yes.
What would you think continuity of care is? Because the thing I put down.
Am I not working? I'm going to. I think you've got a mic.
I put on my form about change of all of antenatal leave to postnatal leave. And I was thinking, you haven't mentioned continuity of carer. I was thinking that the women I know, you know them really well in pregnancy, and then you see them postnatally, and you think, you're not you.
Yeah.
And if you don't know the woman, that's then very good. Are they always like that?
And what I've loved about these sessions actually is getting to meet a load of midwives and health visitors and different people, and that's what they all say is changed quite a bit and is a real shame. And actually, so the confidential inquiry talks a lot about that, is that actually what we need to be able to see is that change, don't we? We need to know the person and see that change, and there isn't always continuity of care. And
so the women will talk to you if they know you?
Yeah, absolutely. We kind of saw that almost in a microcosm in the kind of conversation Joe had, where perhaps the actors are opening up a bit more than when we were all asking one-off questions to them. I think you're right, and so I guess what we ideally do is ensure there's continuity of care, but I guess in terms of on the ground, if you're there, what we might be able to do is just listen a bit more perhaps to the relatives and to the people who do know that person. I think we really need to hear their voice, we need to hear what they're telling us, and I'm not sure that always happens.
That was quite important when we were talking to the parents who'd gone through situations themselves, and one of the big things that came out in the group that we were in was definitely continuity of care, particularly seeing the same GP each time, seeing the same midwife through antenatally, and I think the lady we were chatting to said she saw a different midwife postnatally and didn't feel that she could approach that midwife, but felt that if she'd seen the midwives that she saw antenatally, she would have approached them. So I think that's one of the big things. It seems that continuity of care really does make a difference, and I think that's a big thing that people need to keep in their minds as well.
Yeah, no, I agree, definitely. We've got a couple. Who wants to do Ruth or anything? I don't want to do it.
Yeah, I just wanted to.
Oh, just 2 seconds and we'll have one of those amazing microphones.
I just wanted to ask how you feel the pathways are working, because we see so many women that don't fit into. And I'm just working at Southmead Hospital at the moment with Sasha Barber in her mental health clinic. There's a peer support worker who just started that as an NHS pilot. And even up there the other day, there was a crisis call that came in to Sasha, who gives her mobile number out. And, the thought was, well, recovery are already involved, so you can't go through to crisis because the etiquette is that recovery are working with her. And nobody was picking up the phone in the recovery department because it was 5 p.m. and there wasn't anybody working. And this is what I sort of saw happening. And then the crisis team were called. I don't know when they could go around, but it ended up going to A&E. And this is what we just see, so many women like this that are being batted back and forth from recovery to crisis. And we dealt with one the other day who happens to be in one of our groups, and I just said, it's not really my place, but I really feel this can't continue to happen with this mum. She's really unwell, and she's now in New Horizons, thank goodness. But we see so many of these, so I totally appreciate these pathways, but we see so much on the ground where people are slipping hugely through the net, and these are women that might never get to see a psychiatrist or get the support of a mother and baby unit, or even the team, because the new team, possibly because they haven't been unwell, this has come from nowhere. And is it the majority of it's the suicide risk group? You know, we're seeing this all the time and escalating these cases all the time. I don't know, I'd love to see that it's going to change, and I really hope it will, but there's a lot of them out there.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So yeah, sorry, I just kind of don't know. I don't know what you feel about that and what the answer is to that.
Well, I think there probably isn't a simple answer that I have to that. I don't know whether Joe might say something after me. I think the advantage of me doing this year is what I've been able to do is compare different areas. And I think there are different areas. So at the moment, I think what happens is quite erratic, depending on where you are a bit. So what I've noticed in Devon, which has had a community team around for 7 years, working with the crisis teams and the other community teams, is some increased awareness there compared to definitely when I started working with them 4 or 5 years ago. But it does seem to take a long time. I think you need really clear care pathways that can't be argued against, and you need to increase the awareness and training in those teams, which is always difficult when they're in a lot of stress themselves and they're struggling. I think that's partly what we see is that those general services are under a lot of pressure and stress themselves, and that's partly the issue. But I think awareness and training are really important. I don't know if Ali's.
Yes, I wanted to say something about the Devon community perinatal mental health team. I think that we've been able to address some of those issues that were just mentioned because we've been co-located in maternity units, so we have had a really visible presence amongst other disciplines, and we haven't been hidden behind mental health services, which often seem very impenetrable, I think, to people who don't work within them. And I think some of our success has been in just trying to be the glue that sort of pulls everything together. So particularly with some of our communication systems, we can see other mental health systems having input with women, and sometimes we'll just stick on our oar in, which isn't always welcome, but I think that has actually helped to address some of those issues so that actually women don't feel that they're either not getting a service or they're just getting pushed from one assessment to the other. And I think that has probably been because we've operated a universal screening, so we've tried to make it look like that this is a pregnancy-related risk like any other pregnancy-related risk. There's nothing special about it. Everyone will be asked about their mental health when they book with a midwife, and you know, they all come to us. We don't see all of those women, but we make a triage decision about those women that we might need to get in touch with, and then we leave the door open for those women to get in touch with us if we've made a decision actually that hasn't been right for them. So we don't have a single point of access really. So they haven't got to go around and around a mental health system before they find us, and I think that's a model that's worked well for us in Devon, and it would be good to see that replicated in other parts of the country.
Maybe that's partly it, is learning from other places where things are going well or differently.
We've spoken a lot about getting ill after birth. Have you any thoughts about people who are already ill before they get pregnant, or who become ill during the course of the pregnancy? And that's a big question.
I mean, I think it's still a significant issue, isn't it? There are different stresses around that time of people's lives, so it's different in that point of view. So the early warning signs around the idea of more postnatally, but I think those people should still have access to specialist perinatal mental health teams, and that's one of the better ways of them being supported. I think there are similar things that need to be done in terms of screening and help as there are postnatally. There are the same issues really. I don't think it should be seen that separately.
Can I just say something about?
I mean, I could just say something about what happens again in our service. Any woman with a mental health question or concern can self-refer, or any other mental health service can refer any woman who's got a significant concern in for a preconception meeting, and they're really well taken up. So women who are on maintenance medication and want to have a conversation like that, women who have had a previous postpartum psychosis, women who've got a diagnosis of bipolar affective disorder,
are coming to us now more frequently during the family planning phase, and that's fabulous.
I believe our local IAP services will treat people who have anxieties about giving birth. So kind of starting before rather than leaving it afterwards.
Exactly. So an intervention, a psychological intervention is possible. We, as Kai was talking about, we kind of triage everything, and we signpost lots and lots of women very early into depression and anxiety services.
I wanted to just come back to the question of continuity of midwifery care. I'm a community midwife, and we've got a long way to go before we're going to have postnatal continuity. There's been a lot of emphasis where I work on antenatal continuity. So, for example, a specific woman I can think of, I've seen her for every single one of her antenatal appointments, but I know that after she's given birth, the chances of me being able to see her postnatally are very slim. She'll have 2 of her postnatal contacts will be with a maternity care assistant, and however excellent they are, which they are, they're not. They don't have, the training. They're not expected to address mental health concerns, and the reason what that comes down to is the size of the caseload. We just don't have enough midwives with enough time. So, as a midwife on the ground, you have very limited control over how much continuity you have postnatally. And I don't know if there's anyone in this room who has any influence over, service design, but that's what we need to be able to deliver that continuity. And I feel we are quite a long way from it at the moment, certainly where I work.
I think in our area it's quite different. We do have very good postnatal continuity care. So again, it's different areas, isn't it?
Just hearing how the different areas, I don't know if everyone heard that, different areas are different in terms of postnatal. In terms of questions, I reckon we should probably have 2 more, maybe? 2 more, yeah.
I'm just from Somerset and the Commissioner, and I know that we have had difficulty recruiting midwives. So in terms of service redesign, that's partly why we've been exploring different ways of arranging our midwives so that we can sort of cover the bases. And I do wonder whether we've done enough to try and maintain that continuity. So it's something I'm going to take back.
Thank you. One more, I think, then we probably have to move on to our next part discussion, or else move on to the discussion and else we'll run out of
Make it
time.
really quick then.
That's right, no, I think that's right.
Just going back to Peter's question about before people get pregnant in the antenatal period. We're setting up the service in Gloucestershire, and my manager's very keen for a lot of the antenatal referrals to come through. So if anyone is concerned, because it's the opportunity you get to work to prevent people getting very unwell, or the impact on the family, and what we were talking about in terms of the infant mental health. So it's really important to kind of be asking these questions and get the referrals through before it's postnatal and it's already become more of a problem.
That's good to hear, isn't it? Great. Well, thanks everybody. I think we're moving on to our next section now, so I'll pass over to Jo.
Okay, so our last session is our question and answer. I don't know about you guys, but I think we got quite a lot done today. I feel a bit wrung out actually. So we went through our I'm fine. I hope you remember it. I hope you use it. I hope it makes sense. I think what we got to at the end was some really real questions and concerns about service configuration and service gaps. I would say that we have to be, so I think about what the Maternal Mental Health Alliance have done is got into campaigning mode. There is something about maternity transformation which feels like it should be an opportunity, but it doesn't always feel like it's going to be. So we have to, each of us, in each of our conversations with people who are in leadership roles and management roles, we have to be prepared to be a bit bullshy. We have to put in risk day text forms if we think we're doing something unsafe, so letting go of a woman who we think is at risk of postnatal. We have to sometimes do things that feel a bit uncomfortable and name it, name the things that don't feel like really good care. That's not always popular. If I think back on my own experience of trying to get services off the ground, I didn't always make friends along the way by saying the uncomfortable things, but if you think women, the lives of women, or the experience of the health of women, or their children are at risk, we've got no choice. So I would just leave that with you. If you think that there's something that we're doing in our services that feels like we're disadvantaging women, we have to call it out. And so I think it's a really tricky thing. It's a really tricky thing to take to our management meetings. It's a really tricky thing to ask to put in our organisational risk registers. But actually that's what we have to do, and just be get into campaigning mode and don't allow complacency to creep in at a time of ever shrinking resources. So we're going to move on to our final session, which is our question and answer. So instead of having a traditional the room asks the questions and the panel gives the answers, we're going to do a little bit of that, but we're also going to do a little bit of the people on the panel asking questions of the room. And the people on the panel are going to be our parents who helped us earlier. I said that we're going to pick up some of those conversations. So the parents who are going to come and help us on our panel, could you come forward, please? The other thing I should say is we're going to live stream this part of the day, so this is going to be interesting. I've never done anything like this before. Because of that, you'll have to wait for the microphone to reach you before you speak, so we can pick it up, so anyone who's following us on social media can pick this up. So thank you very much. I just now with the camera on the expert panel, don't you love that? Okay. So before we start, all three of the female members of our panel represent really fantastic peer organisations. So before we do anything else, would you like to just say a little bit about those organisations?
So I work for Bluebell, and we are a charitable organisation in Bristol who support women perinatally, so those experiencing antenatal depression anxiety or postnatal depression anxiety. We offer one-to-one support at home, we offer a 12-week therapeutic programme, and we also have our drop-in hub, which is in the city of Bristol, the centre of Bristol, which opens in September, where we offer lots of workshops and activities that support women and dads' well-being. I'll get Louis in there. We've got our dad's worker Louis as well, who offers support to fathers in the area that might be experiencing mental health difficulties themselves, or supporting partners through their own difficulties. I think.
Do you want to pass it on? Okay, hi, I'm Sally Wilson, and I'm a volunteer for Action on Postpartum Psychosis. And APP is a UK-wide charity, and it basically, the idea is that it supports women and families going through postpartum psychosis. There's two sides to it really. One side is looking at research, so looking at research into postpartum psychosis, causes and recovery, and the other side is looking at supporting women and their families. So there's an online peer support forum where people can join up and get access to peer support there. And then there's a one-to-one email support where you can be, a woman who's going through postpartum psychosis can be supported by someone who's been through that. So I'm sort of a lived experience, expert by experience, and I'm a regional rep for North Wales, so trying to help health professionals get access to APP information.
Hi, so in Exeter I am part of a group called Crafting Through Crisis. We are all mums that have come together, me and a fellow mum who both work at the perinatal team and met through the perinatal team through just a bit of peer support really, and the other mum who I run the group with spent some time in a mother with baby unit and found that crafting was a really good way to kind of free the mind slightly and focus on something positive. So we aren't a funded group at the moment, we're self-funding, so we meet once a week. We've been donated a space which is amazing, and we have a free creche which is run by volunteers, and it's a space where mums can come and make something, but they can also be very open and honest with their feelings, because we've all had similar experiences, so there is no judgment. If someone wants to come and cry for the session, we quite often discuss medication, therapies, our own experiences. We have an open Facebook group called Crafting Through Crisis, but we also have a closed Facebook group, so once people have come to the group they are invited to join the closed group, and we use that as a little bit of a place to discuss our worries in a kind of confidential, private setting. So we can all share. If someone's going through a bad time, they can post on there and they'll know that they'll get kind of support and advice. And then we do craft fairs where we sell our stuff to keep ourselves going. We've had some money from Waitrose. We are looking to kind of grow it, hopefully. And we work closely with the perinatal team and they refer people in, but people can self-refer.
Okay, so I said we're going to do this slightly differently. So you will have a chance to ask questions of our experts. But first of all, I want to ask our experts if there's anything they want to ask you, guys. Anything about the day, anything you want to ask people about, what they're taking away or what they've learned, or any questions you've had from your tables?
So I would just like to know from you all, having had a chat with all of us this afternoon, whether there was anything that you really felt was significantly going to change what you're currently doing, or has really made you reflect on what you're currently doing and what changes you might make. Anyone?
Anything helpful? They've all gone to sleep.
I've just recently started in primary care as a mental health nurse. It's kind of new in Bristol at the minute, so I've heard that a few of you guys have mentioned about GPs not being very helpful and sort of dishing out meds and things like that, so I think that's something I'm going to take back to my practice. I've only sort of been there a month so far, but it seems to be going pretty well mental health wise, but it's definitely something, your feedback that I'll bring back to the clinic really. So just thought thanks for that.
Feed it back, feed it back.
Hello, I'm a midwife in South Somerset, and it's made me realise how inadequate our service is in South Somerset. We don't seem to have a referral to a perinatal mental health team at all, and it's certainly something I'm going to take back with me.
Thank you.
I was just going to say that it's made me more determined.
Wait.
It's made me more determined to fight for the continuity of antenatal and postnatal care. That we've been threatened with going down the line of just seeing someone on day 10 to sign them off to the health visitors.
Yeah.
Thank you. Probably best to run.
Yeah, I also felt from being on the table with Amelie and her husband, she spoke really beautifully about how seeds had been planted with their first baby and how her experience then with their second changed, and that really made me think about how sometimes as a health visitor and when I went to the midwife as well, I just think about what's going on now, like what's happened with this birth and this baby, and actually that's not how we live our lives. You know, we come with a whole basket of experiences, and so that was really, really helpful.
It's just made me realise that even though there's been brilliant improvements in services and extra funding from NHS England and the new specialist community teams and all of that, that just still hearing stories and seeing the reality on the ground for a lot of women, I've been really struck by that low risk group with the highest suicide rates. And I think I'm going to take that away with me and think about what more we can do for those families who might be considered moderate but aren't reaching the threshold for the specialist teams, because that feels really, still feels quite unsafe, and like Jo said, perhaps just carrying on being a bit of a pain in the bum and like keep on talking about that and bringing it to people's awareness to see if that can improve.
Maybe we should have a t-shirt printed, Ruth, that says perinatal pain in the bum. I know a few people in the room who would already have heard theirs. Okay. Yes, someone else down here.
One of the most useful things for me today has been the multidisciplinary format, because you work in your own little area, you don't have that much contact with other health professionals, and it can be difficult, as has been mentioned, to know exactly what the pathways are in your area, whether what you've got stuck up on your clinic wall is still in date, whether phone numbers have changed, that kind of thing. So it's been really, really valuable to just hear what else is going on in different parts of the country and in different sort of health professional groups. And I think that's something I'm going to take away with me, is that awareness of the sort of much, much wider network and all the amazing work that is going on in lots of different contexts, and feeling that there is an awful lot to draw on, however, whatever the challenges might be for all of us locally.
Thank you. Can I ask the panel, how did it feel having conversations on the table? Sometimes people with lived experience aren't maybe included as much in conferences or whatever, and sometimes they are. So how does it feel for you guys? How was it on the tables? How's it felt today? Anyone?
I think it always astounds me how, for us living through it, it didn't really. When you live through something that's so horrific, and it doesn't, you don't really kind of have time to process it. And it always astounds me, how interested you guys are to know about it and the questions, and it's really powerful for us to be able to share our story, to hopefully make a difference to your practice, so that hopefully you might see Anne-Emily and Paul in your working lives, and to be able to make the difference that, the support that we had. So for us, it's really powerful to be able to give back, and, really appreciate you all coming to this to learn more, and to be able to work together to save lives and make a difference, because without these services, I wouldn't be here, and Paul would be a widower with 2 children, so.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo that, really, just a thank you for listening, because when you've lived through it yourself for the last 2 years or however long this thing has gone on for, you kind of get engulfed in your own little world, and you think, well, that's all you think about basically for 2 years. And then when you start to talk about it and tell people, you end up becoming immune, because you've talked about it quite a lot, and it just makes you realise that you're not just sitting there talking about yourself or what's happened to your family over the last 2 years. You're helping, hopefully, future yous and future families to kind of make a difference again, to save lives, because we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you guys, really. So thank you.
I'll just third that by saying it's quite empowering to go and share your story and know that it's going to either make a difference to somebody who's poorly and can sort of identify with something that you're saying, or that it's going to change the way that somebody works or approaches someone who is in need of help. So, yeah, thank you.
What about you, Paul? How's it been for you?
How's it been for our token dad?
It was nice to talk to more than one woman without them being on Facebook or checking Instagram whilst watching EastEnders, so that was quite good. But yeah, as the others have said, it's empowering. And for me, I was on a different journey, and actually until today, and seeing all you guys and seeing this event, I hadn't thought about it for, probably for, a couple of years even. It's been a while, hasn't it? So, it kind of brought it all back, and how actually important you guys are, and we've just carried on now with our lives, but you guys are still there living it, and hopefully doing the same for another couple. So thank you. Yeah.
So we've got time for a couple of questions from the floor for our experts. Is there anything burning from the floor that you've not heard? Is there any feedback from your tables that you think So there's a really good theme that came up at our table with one of our speakers who you think would be really good to share with the wider room. Can I ask the panel then, what was the best question you were asked on your table?
Probably what didn't help, because I think it's important for everyone to understand what doesn't help when you're that vulnerable person in the room. And I think one of the things that was quite recurrent at our table was the importance of having some continuity in the care that you receive. So I know that's been mentioned a few times since we had that conversation, but for me personally that played a huge part in me not really disclosing or ever talking to anybody. So having somebody that's a sort of point of contact that knows you well and you know well and that you've got a trusted relationship with can make a real difference in whether or not somebody approaches you for help when they're really in need.
Anyone else got any good questions or themes to the table?
I don't think I can say one best question because they're all pretty good questions, but there were probably two really that came out. One was talking about initial symptoms. So I had an episode whilst I was on the postnatal ward, so it's talking about recognising initial symptoms. So we talked a bit about kind of confusion, loss of sense of time, and being manic in terms of leading up to a psychosis or psychotic episode. So it was trying to kind of recognise those symptoms before things escalated. So we talked a little bit about that, and then access to support. So from just in my experience, I was sort of the opposite of I'm fine. I kept saying I'm not fine, there's definitely something wrong with me, we need support, we need help, please somebody help us. So I was telling everyone everything. I wasn't, I was sort of disclosing my distress as Laurie talked about earlier. So it's kind of looking at the other side of it as well. So when someone's desperate for help, where can you signpost them to? Where can you access the right kind of services that mother or father or family need, really? So yeah, that's it really.
I'm in enough trouble.
Oh gosh, it's been a long week actually. So I can't actually off the top of my head remember.
Anyone on Amelie's table want to help her out with themes that came up on your table?
I mean, I think you spoke a lot about the experience from both of your sides, and I think that just gave an incredible insight really into what the day-to-day experience of going through it is like. And I mean, it sounds like in many ways you had a really positive experience of services, and I was just thinking, wow, because you wouldn't get that in every area. and I just think there's just such variation, so it's just people knowing to an extent what they deserve, what they should expect really. So there was talk about the importance of support perhaps from family. So you were talking about your support from your sister and your mum, but I guess we shouldn't underestimate that. And I guess just listening to you, listening to both of you in terms of how things were, and how they just weren't normal for you.
I think one thing that I would really like to say to promote perinatal services even more, because I know we do have a commissioner here, is that for me, and I know that can be
You just left then.
Well, reoccurring theme with GPs is that sometimes our experiences are bad, and I would just like to say on the medication point of view, so initially my medication was prescribed by GP, and obviously with mental health the difficulty is that sometimes the medication that you can be prescribed can have a kind of negative impact before it has a positive impact, and the difference between being able to the GP prescribing medication and the perinatal team prescribing medication was massive to me, in that their expertise and their knowledge and their management of medication, which really did save my life, was huge. And I know for us at the moment, our GP practice, to get an appointment can be 2-3 weeks, And obviously if you're put on an SSRI and that has a negative impact, you know, if you're already in an anxious state and then that's heightened, if you can't get into your GP. So I've just been just to reiterate how important perinatal services are, not in just for everything, for the medication knowledge, for the knowledge of recovery, because that is such a massive thing to know, for someone to be able to say to you, I've worked with women that have got better, because like it said in the piece, and like these other mums know, there's not an ounce of you that thinks that will happen, and that's why women do end their lives, because there's not the smallest part of you that believes that. It just feels like when you get that ill, it feels like a terminal diagnosis. You think at some point you will be that person that ends their own life. So
I think at one point they put you in. I think at one point you actually put Emily in contact with another lady that had been through it. Was that Joe Friend possibly? And they were in contact on just messaging each other on Facebook for probably a few months before you'd even met. You know, you weren't well enough to even go out. So, which I know Emily's now continues to do with other mums, and you know, again, that's just something else that no one really sees, but it's the support that Joe gave Emily to know that she'd been through it and she was now better, because I think at the time you obviously just don't think you're never going to get better. So to be able to have that contact, you know, even though you're not meeting face to face, but the actual messages and the stuff, that really helped, didn't it? So yeah, that's a really important side of it.
I would completely 100% agree with that I have an expertise that I can take women to a certain point, but I haven't lived through this. So the women who are supporting other women have got a whole range of expertise that perinatal mental health clinicians do not have, and we need to work hand in hand with those two skill sets. We've come to the end of our day. I can't think of anyone better to leave actually than what we've just heard. So has everyone got postcards? Got postcards? So the postcards have got I'm fine at the front, and they've got the what they stand for on the back. Stick them on your walls, send them to your friends, put them in your offices, give them to somebody who you think might benefit from them. We don't want a whole pile of them to take home with us. Thank you very much for coming. I hope it was useful. Now, we're going to have some minders on the door, and if you don't hand in your evaluation forms, I can't honestly promise what they will do to you. I'll let you into a little secret. I was the last person in the room in Saltash, and I forgot the evaluation forms. Did you not? Have I not told you that? Okay. Laurie, so we're desperate for all of the evaluation forms from Exeter and from Bristol, because we lost a third of them. It's all my fault.
Are we still live?